My blissful self. Today, let us know in brief about pranayama. What is prana? Prana means breath. The control of prana is called pranayama. That is, the control of breath is pranayama. The pranayama results in a type of trance, and it is samadhi through ignorance, but it is not a samadhi through consciousness. So there is unhappiness, and the cause of unhappiness is there is happiness in sensory objects, there is happiness in gross body, and the body consciousness. And if we have not been in a position to remove the understanding that there is happiness in the sensory objects, in the gross body, and the body consciousness, until we remove these, there will be no happiness at all, permanent happiness at all. But by a pranayama, so this understanding cannot be removed. When we practice pranayama, that is, when we control the breathing, the control the breath, the mind becomes calm temporarily. And when the mind becomes calm, so the happiness of our real Atman is reflected and experienced. And in deep sleep, the mind subsides, the mind becomes calm, and the happiness of our own Atman self has been reflected and experienced. By practice of pranayama, the understanding that there is happiness in sensory objects, there is happiness in body, gross body, and the body consciousness cannot be removed. So, in this way, by practice of pranayama, so the understanding that there is happiness in sensory objects, in gross body, and body consciousness cannot be removed. And by practice of pranayama, we cannot experience the permanent happiness. It is a temporary happiness like deep sleep. So the postures and the pranayamas, they cannot purify the mind. They can purify the body and they can purify the nadis. But the mind cannot be purified by practice of pranayama. By practice of pranayama, the holding of the mind takes place temporarily and bliss of the Atman is experienced. But when the pranayama is over, the infatuation or the passion of sensory objects and the desire of the body and body consciousness of the that are there in the mind cannot be removed. So the real dispassion is that when the desires of sensory objects have been removed, the desire of a gross body is removed, and the body consciousness is removed. The prana or the breath is gross, but the mind is very subtle. The mind is very subtle. The impressions, that is, the desires of sensory objects, are not there in the prana, but they are in the mind. The prana doesn't bear the desires of sensory objects, the desire of the body, and the body consciousness. But the mind only bears the desire of sensory objects, the desire of the gross body, and the body consciousness. So the so called prana doesn't bear the individual soul, but the individual soul is there in the mind. And if that is the case, the mind with the individual soul controls the prana, but the prana cannot control the mind. So there is unhappiness because in our mind there are likes and dislikes. Until the likes and dislikes can be removed, there will be no happiness at all. But the mind only can destroy the likes and dislikes that have been present in the mind. But the prana cannot destroy the likes and dislikes. The mind only can control the prana, the organs of action, and the organs of knowledge. But the prana cannot. So there are two types of egotism, ahankara. One is vaikarika ahankara, and the origin of prana is in vaikarika ahankara, and the origin of mind is the mixture of vaikarika egotism and taijasa egotism. If the prana stops, the mind stops because the part of the prana is there in the mind. But the desires of sensory objects and the gross body and the body consciousness are there in the mind, but they are not in the prana. So when the mind subsides in deep sleep, the prana doesn't stop because the part of the mind is not there in the prana. So the desires of sensory objects, the desire of the gross body, and the body consciousness cannot be destroyed by the practice of pranayama. So during deep sleep, the breathing is continued and there is bliss. So breathing need not be stopped to obtain bliss. The mind should become calm. And if we calm the mind, there will be happiness. So why we have to care uh, to control the prana and apana to obtain bliss? So pranayama is control of prana or control of breath. By the control of breath, prana is prana is controlled. So in pranayama, there is a puraka. We have to take the air in inhalation. Later, the prana has been controlled, kumbhaka, controlling the breathing, stopping the breathing. Later, there is exhalation, giving out of the breath. So the ratio in general pranayama is 1:4:2. That means if we inhale the air for 10 seconds, then we have to hold the air for 40 seconds. And when we will be leaving the air, so for 20 seconds. So that is the ratio of Puraka, Kumbhaka, and Rechaka during general pranayama. So in this way, by practicing pranayama, we cannot experience eternal happiness or the permanent happiness. So the total number of breaths in a day are 21,600. And in a minute, we breathe about 15 breaths. So by practice of this pranayama, there will be increase in age. We can live for more years. Thus, who practices pranayama can cure many diseases by directing the prana to the affected part. Even we can practice distal pranic healing if we wish, and if our intention of curing the disease is projected with powerful will, we can cure many of the diseases of the patients. So by pranayama, we can practice distant healing. A pranayama can be practiced regularly in early morning and empty stomach. And the air should be quite pure. There should not be any dust particles like that. So don't practice pranayama when the day is hot. So you can practice pranayama or few rounds of pranayama before meditation. So this pranayama drives the drowsiness and it removes many of the diseases. It cures many of the diseases of the body and it makes the body cells, the tissues, and the nerves to function. So the practice of pranayama increases the power of memory. And he who practices pranayama will have a good appetite. So he will have cheerfulness and a light and handsome body. The pranayama cannot bring about the manonasha, the desires of the sensory objects, the desire of the gross body, and the body consciousness cannot be removed. But these will become calm till the pranayama has been practiced. So the pranayama is the regulation of breath or the control of prana. So this destroys all the diseases, removes laziness, it makes the body light and healthy. The postures and the pranayama can cure all types of diseases. So too much fat that has been there in the body can be reduced. So there will be a luster in the face like the sparkles of the diamond. By practice of pranayama, the voice becomes very sweet and melodious. By practice of pranayama, the inner anahuta sounds are distinctly heard. By practice of pranayama, the jataragni is increased. The advanced yogi acquires the major ashtasiddhis like anima, mahima, garima, etc., and 36 minor siddhis. So that is about pranayama in brief. And by this, I end my talk.